The next era of women's tennis may already be unfolding, not through one dominant player, not through one rivalry, but through something deeper. A change in the speed, athleticism, and psychology of the sport itself. Because if you watched the previous video, the one examining why the power triangle in women's tennis might be more fragile than it looks, you already saw the first signs. Structures that appear stable can shift quickly. But the real story may not be about who controls the tour. It may be about how the game itself is evolving. And the uncomfortable possibility that the next generation isn't just replacing players, they're changing the sport. But this conversation isn't about one tournament. It's about the architecture of modern tennis. Every era of the sport has a defining rhythm. The Gauff era was built on relentless consistency. The Aryna era brought overwhelming power and athletic dominance. Even the big three on the men's side reshaped tennis with endurance and tactical adaptability. But when the rhythm of the sport changes, when rallies shorten, when players move faster, when pressure appears earlier in points, the entire competitive ecosystem shifts. The players who dominated yesterday may suddenly look slightly slower. The tactics that once controlled rallies may lose their authority, and new players arrive already adapted to the faster environment. Which raises the central question of this era. Is women's tennis entering a completely new evolutionary phase?
That is very nicely done.
Now let's look at the bigger picture for a second. Major changes in tennis rarely come from a single factor. They come from structural forces working together. 4 pressure points are quietly reshaping the modern women's game. Court speed. Subtle adjustments to surfaces influence rally length and positioning. Baseline power acceleration. Modern players strike the ball earlier and harder than ever. Athleticism arms race. The physical standards of elite tennis continue rising. Mental resilience. Younger players are entering the tour with an entirely different psychological profile. Individually, each of these forces is manageable, but together they create something new. A faster, more explosive version of the sport. But here's where the story becomes more complicated. Modern match data shows a gradual shift in rally dynamics. Average rally length on hard courts has steadily declined in many WTA events over the past decade. More points now end within the first 4 shots. Serve +1, return +1, first strike aggression. But statistics alone don't capture the feeling inside the match. Watch a rally in today's game. The ball arrives earlier. Players take the ball on the rise. Baseline exchanges accelerate quickly into attack patterns. What once felt like a tactical build now feels like a race for control. And when the tempo increases, the margin for hesitation disappears. Because in a faster game, reaction time becomes everything. But the shift becomes clearest when you focus in on individual rallies. Imagine a tight semifinal between 2 elite players. The crowd is quiet. Both players know the moment matters. The rally begins with a deep return. The server steps inside the baseline. A heavy cross-court forehand. Then the acceleration. Instead of retreating, the opponent takes the ball early, redirects down the line. The point ends in 4 shots. 10 years ago, that rally might have extended. 6 shots, 8 shots, maybe even a tactical reset. Today, the window for control closes almost instantly. And you can see the emotional effect. Players no longer search for rhythm. They search for initiative. Whoever takes control first often wins the point. Now look at the historical benchmark. Tennis has experienced evolutionary shifts before. Steffi Graf introduced unprecedented speed and forehand dominance. Serena Williams transformed the physical power ceiling of the sport. The big three demonstrated endurance and adaptability across surfaces. Each shift forced the next generation to evolve. But what's happening now feels slightly different. Previous eras revolved around individual dominance. Today's shift is structural. The entire competitive field is faster, stronger, more explosive, which means dominance becomes harder to maintain. Because when the baseline level of athleticism rises, the margins between elite players shrink. But that's only part of the picture, because acceleration comes with consequences. Faster rallies demand earlier decision-making. Earlier decisions increase risk. More aggressive positioning exposes defensive space. And higher physical intensity increases injury exposure. In other words, the same forces that make the sport exciting also introduce instability. Players must sustain higher physical output. Matches demand quicker reactions, and recovery windows between tournaments shrink. The result is a sport that moves faster, but also tests durability more severely, which may explain why dominant structures sometimes struggle to hold. Because sustaining dominance in a faster sport becomes exponentially harder. So what happens next? History suggests evolution rarely stops once it begins. Young players entering the tour today were trained in this faster environment. They grew up returning bigger serves, redirecting pace earlier, playing aggressive baseline tennis from their teenage years. Their instincts match the speed of the modern game, which means the next generation may accelerate the trend even further. More explosive movement, more aggressive returns, more points decided in the first few shots. The sport doesn't just continue, it speeds up. If the current generation adapts, the era stabilizes. The same champions continue controlling the biggest tournaments. But if the acceleration continues, the entire rhythm of tennis changes. Because the future of the sport may not belong to the player with the most consistency, or even the most power. It may belong to the player who adapts fastest. The one who can survive inside a game that is constantly accelerating. And if that acceleration continues, women's tennis may be entering its most explosive era yet. But to truly understand that shift, we need to look even deeper. At the numbers behind rally length, at the changing speeds of courts, at the rise of first-strike aggression. Because the next chapter of this story isn't just about evolution. It's about acceleration.